Well, a federal court has finally ruled that fluoride poses an unreasonable risk to our health. So then why the hell is it still in our drinking water? Will the incoming Trump administration finally put an end to all of that? We sure hope so. Partner at Siri and Glimstead, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs in the Food and Water Watch versus the EPA, lead attorney on that was Michael Connett. He's the one responsible. Folks, if you're watching this, if you want to know who the man is that really drove this into the ground and stopped the EPA from doing this, trying to lead this crusade about getting the fluoride out of our water, that's this man. Michael Connett now joins us for a deeper dive discussion on fluoride and the uphill battle with the government. Nice to see you, Michael. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you for having me on.
Well, we've been following this story for a couple of years here on the show, and as this court case unfolded, and of course now we have the resolution. We have the federal court ruling that fluoride does pose an unreasonable risk to our health. First of all, just your reaction to that. Were you shocked that they agreed with you?
By the time the ruling came out, I wasn't shocked because we had two trials in this case. And the way the evidence came in, the nature of the expert testimony, and the kinds of questions that the judge was asking throughout the trial, I did think we were going to win the case. Now, if you asked me 7.5 years ago when we first filed the case, whether I thought we were going to win, to be honest, I would have said no. I would have thought it was going to be too much of an uphill battle. But by the end, and just the nature of the testimony, I did feel pretty confident that we were going to prevail.
You talk about the nature of the testimony. What were some of the most compelling arguments against fluoride in our drinking water that you heard, from the witnesses that were brought to the stand?
Right. And to be clear, this case focused on one adverse outcome of fluoride exposure, and that's effects on the brain, particularly the developing brain. And so the testimony at trial was really focused on that. But I think the most compelling testimony focused on the vulnerability of the brain during the prenatal period, during early infancy, the fact that there is no effective blood-brain barrier to keep chemicals out, the fact that fluoride gets through the placenta, and we know there's going to be access to the brain in utero. And you couple that with these birth cohort studies that have been funded by the National Institutes of Health here in North America that have now consistently found that fluoride exposure during pregnancy is significantly associated with reduced IQ in children. And at trial in this case, we had the good fortune of being able to call as experts the scientists who were publishing those NIH-funded birth cohort studies. I think their testimony was given a lot of weight by the court.
So the NRC found that lipids and phospholipids and protein content have been shown to be reduced in the brains of laboratory animals subsequent to fluoride exposure, correct?
That's what they're saying here, yes.
And the CDC agrees with that finding.
Yes, as a summary of the hazard.
And that was really the headline, wasn't it, Michael? Which fluoride linked to lower IQ in children. I mean, that hit hard. And that hit probably parents hardest when thinking about growing up. I would go to elementary school in Pennsylvania and get those little pink pills in the back of the room. They would give us in a little cup. And every morning we had to take these fluoride pills before school started. In kindergarten and first grade and so forth, you had to take your fluoride pills. And to think that, that was lowering my IQ or thinking that's lowering the IQ of these children is just devastating.
Yeah, and one of the things we did get on the record in this case is I had the opportunity to depose the Centers for Disease Control through what's called a 30B6 deposition, where the CDC had to put forward a representative who would defend CDC's position on fluoridation. And it was a lengthy deposition. And one of the things I asked the CDC about was, how does fluoride actually work to help teeth? Okay. Because when we started this program, and the reason you were taking those pills, Clayton, is because the public health community back when we started this program believed that you needed to swallow fluoride. You needed to ingest it. And the earlier in life you ingest it, the better. That was the premise of adding fluoride to pills and adding fluoride to drinking water. Well, when I deposed the CDC official, he admitted under oath that the predominant benefit of fluoride to teeth, whatever that benefit is, comes from topical contact with the outside of the tooth when the fluoride's in the mouth, not when you ingest it.
So CDC recognizes and accepts that fluoride's predominant mechanism for preventing tooth decay comes from fluoride's topical contact with the outside of the enamel, correct?
Predominantly, that's where the benefits are, yes.
Okay.
And he also admitted, based on that, that there's no benefit at all, from a child receiving fluoride in the womb or a child receiving fluoride in infancy, the first 6 months of life, because there's no teeth, there's nothing to apply topically, right? And so that admission I thought was significant because at the same time, the evidence is showing that that's the period of greatest risk to the brain. If you're being exposed in utero, if you're being exposed through infant formula in your first few months of life, that's when the brain's most vulnerable to fluoride's adverse effects. And yet the CDC was admitting in this case under oath that there's absolutely no benefit during that period of life. So from a risk benefit standpoint, there's literally no benefit to offset the risk to the brain.
Did they know this? Were they hiding it? Were they fully aware of this? And you knew that they were hiding this? Or was this sort of like a revelation from the CDC? Wow, we didn't realize this was so damaging and it actually doesn't do anything.
Well, fluoridation really should have ended by the 1990s at the latest. And that's because in the 1990s, the CDC first admitted finally that you don't need that the predominant benefit is topical. It's not systemic, which is what they had believed for decades. So once we knew you don't need to swallow this stuff for the only benefit it provides, namely prevention of cavities. Once we knew that, I think the US really should have moved away from water fluoridation at that point in time, because when you add fluoride to water, you are going to swallow it, period. That's what you do with water. You swallow it, right? And so we really should have moved away from fluoridation at that time. Now, the case for moving away from fluoridation today is much more compelling when you start seeing these studies finding real and serious risks, including to the brain, including to the bones and whatnot. So once you have a risk now from swallowing this, why are we still adding it to the water of over 200 million people here in the US?
It's a great question. You've spoken about the suppression of the scientific research around fluoride's health effects. Why do you think this suppression occurs? Number one, why are they trying to hide this? And how can it be prevented?
Well, that is something that I have spent a lot of time researching in national archives and in various, for quite a while, looking at a longstanding pattern of data suppression, both from industry as well as the government. The question as to why is a more difficult question, but certainly I think federal health officials, since the beginning of this program water fluoridation, and this started in the 1940s, federal health officials have ultimately seen their role as promoting fluoridation, not as sort of being the sort of independent umpire to assess the risks and the benefits. So the government has really been in a promotional posture as opposed to a more independent one. And I think that's been a disservice to the public, because the public looks to the government to say, just tell us like it is. Like, give us the good, give us the bad, so that we can make an informed decision as to how we want to use fluoride. And instead, what we've seen time and time again is the government curates the information and only gives us the stuff that makes fluoride look good all the time without the risks. So I do think we've had the federal health authorities have done a real disservice to us, the public, in how they've communicated on this issue.
Talk about transparency. What can the public do, public-private, do to push for greater transparency in the scientific research related to public health? Like, what are your hopes and dreams for the incoming Trump administration under the auspices of RFK Jr. and others, and some of these other attorneys who we're now seeing that are going to be part of the administration as well?
Well, I think the first thing, and I think, Robert F. Kennedy has talked about this, and I certainly hope that the new administration will follow through, and that is, RFK talked about wanting to inform the public and provide information to the public about the current state of knowledge on water fluoridation. And I think that would be an important first step. I think it would be very appropriate for the Department of Health and Human Services to communicate to municipalities and to the public that, hey, we thought you needed to swallow this stuff. Now we know you don't. Most countries in the Western world don't fluoridate their water, and their cavity rates have gone down just as much as here in the United States. And there's peer-reviewed scientific research linking fluoride to increased bone fractures, to arthritis, to neurodevelopmental disorders. It's time for us to move away from systemic fluoride use. I think if the new administration simply conveyed that information to the public, that would be a really important first step towards transparency, and with transparency, better decision-making at the state and local level.
Is it safe to call fluoride a toxin?
Oh, absolutely, unquestionably.
Neurotoxin, bone degeneration, arthritis, I would imagine, probably osteoporosis, if it's bone degeneration as well. It's hard for me to wrap my head around it in the United States. We've been doing a lot of segments lately about how the government is just tied so deeply into these companies that make a lot of money off of keeping us sick, keeping us hurting us, and it's really, really disturbing. Whether it's in the processed food industry or otherwise. Why do we have fluoridation in our water? Can maybe you educate our audience as to why in the 1940s we even started this, and how was it pushed to the American people at that time?
I sometimes describe the early politics of fluoridation as a perfect storm of special interests. There was several at issue. First, you have the sugar industry that was heavily promoting and funding research into fluoride because from the sugar industry standpoint, they wanted to see a way of tackling tooth decay, which was a real problem in the US at that time. They wanted to find a way to tackle tooth decay without limiting sugar intake, right? So they had a vested interest there, and they acted on it. And there's a lot of historical documents to show that. So you have the sugar industry. Second, you have the American Dental Association. And why would the American Dental Association, this trade organization of dentists, why would they be promoting fluoridation? Well, certainly dentists who unquestionably thought it would be a good thing. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that the good intentions are there. But there was an institutional interest with the ADA, and that is, at that time in the 1940s, there was a movement to socialize medicine, to socialize dentistry, or to at least bring about more universal healthcare, universal dental care. And as you may know, the American Medical Association strongly opposed efforts to socialize medicine, right? Well, the American Dental Association did the same thing. They did not want to see the government getting involved with the provision of dental care, right? It would cut into their monopoly, and fluoridation was an attractive policy for them because it was a way of appearing